Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hi, Selma. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad that you decided to do this podcast with me. I'm super excited about our topic today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Great. So for people who don't know and aren't familiar, you are an attachment therapist that works primarily with children.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you do with the kiddos?
Sure. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. So I work with families and children who have been affected by trauma that's happened early on in the child's life and has affected their attachment style. So I help parents understand their child's needs. I help them understand how to help their child heal. And then I help the whole family go from being hurt and misunderstood to being accepted and help one another.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that works? Can you walk us through that process or what a typical client would look like for you?
Sure. My clients come from all sorts of walks of life. A typical client, however, that calls in is in need of help because their child is struggling with their emotions. So they call me and say, okay, Selma, I need help. Can we come in? Once they come in, I usually meet with the parents alone for a couple of sessions just to get a better idea and picture of their parenting style, of the family dynamic, of the actual situation that's happened and occurred. And then we go from there. I do a lengthy assessment on the family because I come from the school of thought that if you do a very thorough assessment and are able to pinpoint the needs of the family, then you can really zone in on the treatment and help them through. My treatment can go anywhere from, 4 months to a couple of years and longer at a time, depending on what the child's and family's needs are.
Wow, that's awesome. And typically when working with children, what age range do you work with?
I primarily work with children birth to 12 years old. There are, however, children who come to see me that are a little bit older than that because I have seen them in the past, or the parents specifically ask for me because of my background and experience.
Okay. And so the children that you're working with, they have behavioral difficulties. Can you share a little bit more about what the parenting style is that causes certain behavioral difficulties in children?
All the parents that come to see me are wonderful parents who are doing something proactively to help their children.
Sure.
I also work with adoptive parents, so there is a different dynamic in that as well. And but I'll focus on the biological relationship today. Most of the time what I see are parents who are very, very busy living a life of having to take care of many children, having to take care of many things in their life, going to work, being very busy. So their child and their emotional needs kind of go into the back end of all the to-dos that they have to do. So the children feel neglected in a sense of their emotional needs are not met. The physical needs are there for the most part. They're met by the parents, but the emotional needs are not. And when the emotional needs are not met, the children tend to find ways to make that known. Sometimes it's through having very irregular, I call them roller coaster moods. They go from happy to sad or angry very quickly. Those feelings then turn into also interactions. And some children tend to isolate, and some children tend to be very, very abrupt in their behavior and very violent and disrespectful.
Wow.
And may do some self-harm. Even babies, they'll do some head banging, or toddlers, they'll bite, spit, kick, scream. Those are usually the reasons parents call. I can't stop them from biting or kicking or screaming. Can you please help? So for the most part, the type of parent that will call is a parent who is very busy with their own to-do list, and the emotional needs of the child is sometimes neglected.
That's unfortunate. And it sounds like in your work, the children are just reacting to try to get some kind of connection or attention, even if it's negative attention.
I don't like to use the word attention. I always tell parents, your child is looking for a connection with you.
Okay.
Once you really start noticing what your child wants from you, then things are going to turn around. But here's the catch. A lot of parents have trouble with that. So I have to evaluate their attachment style. I have to evaluate their personality traits. I have to talk to them about their own parenting experience, which for the most part, most parents have some type of baggage that comes along with that. And on top of that, a certain number of parents have their own mental health issues that they're working through or working on. Some are aware of them, most are not. And what do you do in these difficult situations when there's a lot of control that parents can't give up?
And I think you touched on something that a lot of people don't think about, especially as they become adults and they feel like maybe they're estranged from their parents, or they don't have a good relationship with their parents, or God forbid, they don't like their parents. And the thing that you touched on is that parents have their own baggage and their own mental health stuff.
Have a baggage, and some of us are not afraid to open up that bag or that luggage we carry around and deal with what's inside. But most of us are afraid of that, and we'd rather just put it away in a little compartment and push it away, not realizing how it actually affects us.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes forget that, and especially if it had a negative effect on them, or if they're one of the children like the ones that you work with that grow up feeling neglected, or just like their parents weren't there for them emotionally, they begin to resent that. And I'm curious, from your standpoint, when you're evaluating these parents, what kind of baggage or mental health issues do you see for the common layperson who may not even be aware?
Sure. So in all of this, I also teach a parenting class. When certain parents come in to work with me, I sometimes refer them to the parenting class, because the basic concepts of understanding emotional attachment, emotional needs, is just something that is like, what do you mean? So I have to go back to the basics and teach them. And when they come into these classes, there are a lot of questions that this class poses that are very reflective. So they have to look at themselves, and they have to evaluate where they're coming from and why is it that they're dealing with certain things. So a lot of the times, the answers I get when we get to these parts of this class is, well, my parents never did this. I was spanked as a child and I was okay. My parents were never around and I still turned out okay. I get a lot of very authoritative parenting styles from the past where, kids, they weren't allowed to speak unless they were spoken to as children. Not allowed to cry in front of their parents, even if they were being hurt. A lot of them make the comment, well, I would hear constantly, if you don't stop crying right now, I'll give you something to cry about.
Wow.
Or if I brought you to this earth, I can take you out of this earth. So those are very common things I hear. And it feels like 95% of the parents I work with do not have a safe and secure relationship with their own parents.
Okay.
And they tend to come in with that type of baggage. I don't know what my parents did, but then haven't really educated themselves on what they should do to prevent those things happening. Because subconsciously, as you know, certain things creep up on you and you do end up repeating them.
It sounds like, from just my experience and what I do A lot of the tactics that they may use with their children is they degrade their children or they instill fear in their children by threatening, or children are to be seen and not heard. So there's really no value. There's really no fostering the independence of the child.
A lot of parents practice timeouts, and especially when children are little, they're going through a stage of learning their emotions at that time. And we are not taught to teach people emotions at any stage in our lives unless we go to grad school and become a therapist or a psychologist. You start understanding how big of a role emotions play in your life. And most of the time, parents, because that's traditionally what we have been taught, and I myself thought this is what you should do. If your child is just, not behaving appropriately, you send them to a timeout, or you send them to the corner or the timeout chair, not realizing that, yes, that's fine and dandy while they're young. But what happens when they're teenagers or adults and they really need your help and they shut you out at that point, no matter how often you come to them and say, tell me what's going on. And now you're shut out because what have you taught them? When they're having an emotionally hard time, you have done what? You've sent them out to their own room and into a timeout chair, into the corner. You never really address those emotions with them. So quite frequently, I tell parents, let's practice a time in. Let's practice a time in. And what that means is be there for your child when they're going through this hard time. It's a little bit harder now, but you'll be thankful for it later down the line. And again, parents do struggle with that because there's certain baggage that comes around.
Wow. I'm curious about this word attachment. You've used that quite a bit. So for the lay person, what is attachment and how does it affect us? And do we really need it?
The way I like to explain attachment to parents is that it's the relationship between you and your child. It's the relationship that you are responsible for building. It's the relationship where you're in the driver's seat and you get to decide how well you want your child to relate to you. The child is not responsible for building that attachment. There's a difference between an attachment and a bond. And a bond is how a parent feels toward a child. So how a parent perceives their child and how much they care for them. And the attachment is how the child responds to that bond to develop that relationship with their parents. So the parent is bonded to the child, hopefully, and the child then starts attaching to the parent. So in early infancy, when hopefully this bonding experience for the parent starts in the beginning of pregnancy, when they find out that they're pregnant, and then the mom and the dad develop that bond, and then it turns into actually the bond becomes even stronger when the baby's there. So when the baby cries, we go pick it up, we do whatever needs to be done, we play with the baby, feed it, we change it, we bathe it. And then as it grows older, that attachment on their end becomes safe and secure because they know this is my mom, this is my dad, this is my caregiver. No matter what, if I need something, I can go to them and they can help me out with this. As long as we're meeting their emotional needs, that secure and safe and secure relationship or attachment is going to develop itself, but it takes a lot of work on the parent.
So basically what you're saying is that we work with people so that they can feel safe when going to their parents, that they feel like their parents, they can actually go to them and open up and not be judged by whatever it is they're going through in a negative way, and that I can feel comfortable going to mom and talking to mom or dad about my problems. Not only that, but mom or dad can be my cheerleader when things are going great and just be there for me regardless of what I'm going through and accept me as who I am.
That takes a lot of work. When parents, what we have to remember is the stronger, the more secure and safe their relationship is with their child, the less likely, statistically, and research has shown this, the less likely their child will develop a mental health disorder, the less likely they will be involved with substance abuse, legal problems. They'll be successful in school. They'll have very good self-confidence. They'll have a form of self-esteem.
Yes.
It's going to be a very positive, they're going to be positive role models it takes effort, but it's doable. And when you reach that end, it's a phenomenal feeling. It's phenomenal to see that.
Yeah, and I would agree. I've actually researched and done my own study on that, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything you just said. I also want to point out that when parents are doing those things that are detrimental, like what you said, not checking in with their children, not talking to their children, not building a relationship with their children, that's traumatic. That is a form of trauma, and a lot of people don't recognize that as being a psychological or an emotional trauma or even a verbally abusive trauma when they're instilling fear and things like that, or maybe name calling their children. And actually, that trauma has been shown to be more detrimental. So that's like a lifelong thing that people can't get over, and they have to work through that. Maybe many years of that they have to work through.
It's so phenomenal that you're saying that. Actually, a lot of the parents I work with will tell me, the physical stuff that's happened to me, the physical wounds, I am over that. It's happened and I can't go back to fix it, but my body isn't hurting. For the emotional aspect, I carry those wounds with me, and those wounds are very difficult to even look at. So it's so important that we are aware of ourselves, our attachment style, our relationship style, so that we are not imposing our own issues on our child, that we're not doing that. And that takes a lot of reflection, looking into yourself as a parent and really providing your child with what they need, not what you think they need.
Right. And when you have a parent that has gone through their own trauma and they're moving through life in their own traumatic state, right? Because a lot of times when we have trauma, it's more of an emotional, it's been more of a verbally abuse, and it's been instilled in you as a value, which it sounds like that's what your parents are saying to you. This is what my parents told me, and therefore it's passed down. So it becomes a value. It's also a multi-generational thing where it's kind of passed through generations of family. And so they don't necessarily have that level of clarity or insight. Not only that, but you're talking about undoing years, maybe generations worth of hardwiring. How is that done? How do you work on that?
With a lot of work. It's not something that gets done in 1 to 5 sessions. It's a lot of very, very slow steps. I like to use this. I read this book when I was in grad school, and it was about trauma, and I forget the title of it, but there's one part of it that stuck with me. When you talk about trauma, and this is not your typical trauma that you hear about a lot. This is something that we call complex trauma. The complex trauma that occurs is when more than one traumatic event occurs for a period of time in a child's life, and then they become an adult, and these continue to affect them for the rest of their life. So sometimes it becomes part of their personality. That's different. How do you tell someone, hey, certain things about you, the way you're connected up here, are not healthy, they're not okay? All of us would take offense to that, right? But when parents take that self-reflective look, it's phenomenal what parents will do. So treating them takes a lot of self-reflection, education. I spend a lot of time educating parents who are ready for it, educating them on what this looks like. I provide them with a lot of literature, a lot of books. I usually refer them out for their own individual therapy with attachment specialists and trauma specialists. And I continue working with them on their parenting while they are going through that process, teaching them tools and things that they can do at home to not allow their own issues to affect their parenting and their relationship with their child.
Wow. And that sounds like a lot of work. And I imagine too, one of the things that I thought about when you were talking about the parents and also the children, especially the age range that you have, or that you work with rather, and that the longer that this has gone on with the child, between the parent and the child, I imagine the effects are more detrimental. So you can almost see the stages of the trauma that the parents are or have been inflicting on their children. I would imagine that the longer that this has gone on, the worse that the child is acting out. Is that your experience?
Yes. Absolutely. When we talk about the trauma aspect of it, coming from this book, it stated something on the lines of, we're about to embark on this path, and this path is going to lead you to this beautiful valley of flowers and just the most peaceful place that you can imagine. But before you get there, you're going to go down this path that's going to be very difficult to walk through. And you're going to enter a forest out of which there's going to come out things that you are deathly afraid of. But however, you have this backpack on you, and this backpack is going to let you walk through this path and walk through this forest and safely arrive to this valley that you really, really want to get to. And this backpack are all the tools and the healing that you're going to get from therapy. So one step at a time, you will reach your end result, but just know it may get a little bit harder and a little bit scarier before you get there. And I love that visual because it's such a beautiful, visual to say, even though you have to go through this very difficult thing, there's hope. There's this backpack you carry, and you are going to have all of these tools, and you will reach the end of all of this. You will get better from this as long as you work through it. So when I tell this to parents, usually they're scared, right? And then they're like, oh no, we won't come back, or most of the time they do. The longer they allow this to continue on in their relationship with their child, they're passing on this dark forest, this difficult path onto their child. And I tell this to them as well. And this is when the wheels start to say, okay, I can deal with it. My child to go through it. And if they come in with children who are much younger, the beautiful part about our mind that when we're born is that before the age of 5, our personality isn't formed yet. Any type of connection that is made before the age of 5 and under is reversible. We can prevent those. I call those prevention years. At the age of 6, our personality is already formed. Our connections in the brain are already formed. Then we go through a thing called pruning, which is kind of the use it or lose it concept. That's why when we're like 6 or 7 or 8 years old, we think we can become an actor, an attorney. That's why learning all of these things that you do as a child is so easy. By the time you reach the age of 12, things start slowing down. So learning a different language, for example, children who learn a different language in those early years from 6 to 12 will probably master the language and have a very small accent than people who learn the language 12 and on. So as long as parents realize that the sooner they address their own issues and address their parenting style, the better off their children will be.
So then that begs the question for me then, can all of them be turned around? Can all of them be a success story and are all of them a success story?
The children primarily can. The parents do struggle, and not everybody is a success story. It all depends on how ready they are. And unless somebody is really ready to change, there's not much that you can do. 50% of the parents tend to make a turnaround. The other 50 tend to struggle.
Okay. And it's almost like, you have to look at your own baggage. And one of the things that goes through my mind is that parents who go through this process, if they go through their own journey of trying to heal and get over their childhood stuff, that means that they have to reflect upon their own parents. And maybe they're just not ready to say that their parents were abusive to them. That's like a really big reality check.
The minute we put the blame into that healing process, we stop healing. I come from the perspective that every parent out there did the best they knew. Some parents didn't know much, had barriers, their own mental health issues, had other barriers like substance abuse. I have worked with people who have gone through a very heavy substance abuse problem and are in recovery and are the most phenomenal parents you will see out there. But there's a lot of baggage that we do not want to pass on to our children.
When parents are working on their own stuff, children are coming to you and working on their stuff. When do you start to see change happening?
It all depends on how the child is. So the younger the kids are, the parents tend to come to me and say, I'm realizing this is more me. This is I have to get this under control. And these things start coming out much sooner with younger kids. I would say anywhere from 2 to 3 months, we start seeing some small, subtle, improvements. So with these preteens and older children, it's a little bit more difficult because now they have words that they can say. They have a mindset of their own, and we have to meet them where they are, because if they are older, let's say they're 10 when you come to see me, they've had 10 years of everything that you have taught them. I have a father who, he is a phenomenal father. He has she just turned 13. Yes, she just turned 13. So she is starting to develop an identity. She's a fashionista. I mean, you see this little girl and she comes into my office and you would be like, oh my goodness, can you teach me some skills? She's just very creative and she loves going to the mall. She loves spending time with her girlfriends. Boys are cute all of a sudden, maybe more than cute. So this father comes, this happened a couple of weeks ago. He comes to my, more than that, but he comes to my office and he goes, but Selma, I have bought us bikes and I have asked her to go bike riding with me, and I will take her to the dollar store and I will give her $5 to buy herself some candy, and then we can go back home. And I just looked at him and I realized at that point that this father still sees her as that 5-6-year-old girl, and she is no longer.
Yes.
I am working, he's very controlling of her. So I'm working with him to help him recognize some of his own thought process.
Right. Yeah, getting them unstuck, and I imagine getting them out of what's been modeled to them from their own parents, just kind of getting them out of that. The other piece that comes up for me is culture. There's so many different cultures, so many different ethnicities, and so many different practices. And one of the things that comes up for me is like spanking or even having your children work. There's so much diversity. And so I'm just wondering, how does that work with you in your practice? And especially within a particular culture that views a certain act with children as being normal, where you may view it, we're in Western society and Western culture, we may view that as trauma. We may view that as traumatic or abusive. And so I'm just wondering, how do you account for those kind of things?
Absolutely. And I will have to be honest, that's a very difficult thing to balance when we talk about attachment. The most beautiful thing about attachment is that it's so primitive. It is so internal. We are born with the instinct to have relationships with people. I tend to ask families of cultures I'm not, you have to understand that every single family, regardless of even the family of my own culture, comes to my office, will still have differences in the culture with my home. So I have to account for that in every single session.
Sure.
I see families in. What I tend to go back to and help parents understand is that this feeling of desire to develop this close connection with our children and them to have that close connection to us, I find that to be universal. I find that to be part of who we are and how we are. How that relationship looks, however, can be a little bit different culture to culture. And I tend to do some study on that. And I ask the family, what do you want? This is not about us, as you know. What do you want? What does this look like? And if the families are recent immigrants or recent individuals who have settled in the United States, they tend to have very close-knit values to the country of origin. However, their children tend to want to be more, I guess the word Americanized, that can be a big struggle sometimes. I am working with a family from Congo right now. The most beautiful part about this, the father called me and said, I need help with my 10-year-old because I don't understand some of her behavior. And this father is probably one of my favorite examples of how universal attachment can be and how we can apply the most beautiful things about every culture into this attachment relationship building to make it work for us. Again, it's not about us. It's about meeting the child where they are at and helping them navigate the scary world. This is a very scary world out here. It was phenomenal for me to reach out to some of my friends who are familiar with the Congolese culture and how to navigate all of this for this family. You have to do what's best for the family. Certain things are going to work for them that may not work for your family or my family.
Right. Right. So I guess with that being said, I think it's important to know that there's not a one size fits all formula, and that, you have to, the therapist such as yourself has to be willing to work with their own cultural values and understand that what we may perceive in our world as being abusive may not be, or traumatic, may not be perceived in their world as being that way. What tips would you give? What resources do you give for people that are struggling to connect with their children and actually want to, and or children that want to connect with their parents and they're unable to reach them?
If they are really struggling with this and they really desire it, I really strongly encourage them to seek out an attachment-based therapist. I encourage them to search online. There are tools that are free where they can assess their own attachment style. I asked them to also look into what their temperament is, what characteristics of their personality is very similar to their child versus what are things that are different. You know how in every family you always get compared to, oh, you're more like your father or you're more like your mother. Are you a person who shares similar qualities that with your child, or are you opposite of that? And how do you meet them in the middle if you are opposite of them? I would also strongly encourage them to find some literature on this, but primarily seek out an attachment-based therapist who can help you. This is not a road that you can go on your own. This is a road where you need some professional help. And also encourage them to read blogs about this. There are a ton of blogs of professionals. I would say those would be my top tips. In terms of their relationship with their child, one tip, please spend at least 15 minutes a day just playing and being there for your child, regardless of what is going on in your life. Meet them where they are at. If they're older, talk to them about what they want to talk, even if it's about music. Find something in common that you can share with them and spend those 15 minutes uninterrupted by anything. Put that phone away. You'll see how things will turn around.
Interesting. And what's some advice that you can give to maybe a child that is struggling with a parent that is controlling, that doesn't want to see them or doesn't want to hear them or just not be present for them?
One thing I want you to remember, if you are a child that's dealing with this or are listening to this, is that this is not your fault. This is not a reflection of who you are. This is not a reflection of how lovable you are. This is not a reflection of how awesome you are. This is a reflection on your parents who don't know better at this time. I want you to know that there are people out there who care for you. And as long as you have one person who believes in you, who you can turn to, they don't have to be your family member. They can be a teacher. They can be a person that's safe for you. As long as you feel confident that they believe in you, you will be more than okay.
Okay, Selma, and so we're going to wrap up here, but how can people connect with you, find out more about you, talk to you, stay in touch with you if they want to?
more than welcome to go to my website, hopeandhealingcenter.com. Also, look me up as Selma Bacevac, the parent-child relationship guru. I have a Facebook page as well as a podcast. The podcast is called Parent-Child Relationship Guru, again, where I talk a lot about things that are going on in these relationships. So emailing, reaching out, subscribing to my page, because I tend to publish weekly blogs about addressing these things. Those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Selma. I am so happy to hear your perspective and how we can work on this from a parent-child dynamic and try to turn things around. Thank you. Okay, so I hope that these tips have been helpful. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'd love to hear from you again at adateWithDarkness@gmail.com, or you can check us out on the Facebook forum. Would love to hear from you and talk to you in the community. Please do like it, love it, and share it. Share the podcast on iTunes and with your family and friends. I'm excited to be here chatting with you and talk with you soon. Take care and be well.